Welcome to this short webinar on the application of plant-based proteins in sports nutrition. Skeletal muscle tissue is a dynamic tissue. And with dynamic, I mean skeletal muscle tissue is constantly being synthesized and broken down. This is what we call muscle turnover. And this turnover happens at a rate of 1 to 2% per day. This is very convenient because it allows our skeletal muscle to recondition. When we perform resistance type exercise, we will start looking more to the guy on the right, and if we do a lot of endurance type exercise, we will start looking like the guy on the left. In other words, our skeletal muscle tissue can recondition and adapt to a different use. This might be a benefit, but of course there's also drawbacks on this muscle turnover, because we can easily lose a lot of muscle tissue following a short period of immobilization due to a fracture or disease. So in short, in order to maintain our muscle, we need anabolic stimuli, and these anabolic stimuli allow us to maintain our muscle health and function. Now there's two main anabolic stimuli, of which one is nutrition and the other is physical activity. For nutrition, it's the protein in our diet that provides us with amino acids. These amino acids are also the building blocks of our tissues. But these amino acids are more than simply building blocks. They're also signaling molecules that directly activate anabolic pathways that lead to the stimulation of muscle protein synthesis. As I said, the other factor is physical activity. And when you combine physical activity with nutrition, you get a synergistic effect. Because following exercise, the ingestion of food intake will lead to a greater stimulation of muscle protein synthesis. Now, and this is something that we all know and apply in sports nutrition, as many athletes will consume protein during recovery from exercise to help recondition skeletal muscle tissue. Now, following ingestion of protein, we have various factors that can affect muscle protein synthesis, which include the source of protein, the amount of protein, but also the composition of your meals, the timing of protein ingestion, how we prepare our food, and also the position in which we eat. Now, most of you have heard about different proteins and, for example, the different proteins in milk protein, the whey protein and the casein protein, where whey protein has greater anabolic properties because it's rapidly digestible and also has a high leucine content. Of course, we generally do not eat extracted proteins. We eat foods. We drink milk, we eat meat. So we know a little bit about these whole foods and how they respond in stimulating muscle protein synthesis. Lately, we've been getting a lot of questions about plant-based proteins and plant-based products. Of course, because of sustainability and pure the media hype, there's a lot of interest in plant-based proteins, and therefore also in sports nutrition. Now, the fact that much of our protein in our diet comes from plant and plant products is evident, as in the general population and also in athletes, about 45% of our daily protein consumption actually comes from plant-derived proteins or plant-derived products. But what are the differences in quality? And yes, this is a whole discussion, and of course quality can be defined in various ways, but to me, or at least in our research, we think about the capacity of a protein to stimulate muscle protein synthesis. And for that perspective, there are differences between different proteins. And it all depends on the digestibility and the digestion and the absorption kinetics and the rate at which the amino acids are appearing in the circulation, the amino acid composition of the protein, and of course these two define the anabolic response. From these studies, and there's not a lot of studies, we have previously seen that soy-derived protein, but also wheat-derived protein, do not have the same capacity to stimulate muscle protein synthesis when compared to an equivalent amount of dairy protein. However, if you compensate for lesser essential amino acid content or lesser leucine content in plant-based proteins, we can actually show that you can compensate for lesser quality by providing greater quantity. And it is exactly the case if you provide more, for example. Now, consuming more food is not always easy, especially when you're actually consuming protein in the form of plant-derived or plant-based products that generally contain less amounts of protein. For example, if you want to ingest 20 grams of protein through potatoes, you have to eat a lot more potatoes than when you try to consume 20 grams of protein through meat. Furthermore, you will also, besides requiring to eat a greater amount of food, you will also consume more calories. So what can you do to improve the anabolic properties of plant-based protein sources? Now, one factor I already alluded to is simply extract the protein from these plants. And this is what companies are often doing, trying to extract the protein out of rest streams of plant-derived or plant-based products in order to generate protein extracts, protein isolates. Another option is, for example, if you have a plant-based protein source with a protein quality that is deficient in a certain amino acid, you can fortify that protein with that specific amino acid in order to improve its amino acid composition. You can also do that in a more natural way by combining different proteins that have compensatory amino acid profiles, where one protein might be limited in, for example, lysine content, another protein might be deficient in methionine, but together you will actually form a protein blend that has no obvious deficiencies. So clearly we know a lot more on protein quality and how protein quality affects this capacity to stimulate muscle protein synthesis. But of course much more research is warranted, because we typically do not ingest a single protein or a single protein isolate. When all these factors come together, including the processing, the different proteins in their matrix of whole foods, all of this comes together in meals, and that's what we typically eat. We consume meals, and how meals actually stimulate muscle protein synthesis is far from elucidated. I hope I convinced you that muscle protein synthesis depends on numerous factors, and that after a meal, the way we stimulate muscle protein synthesis depends on numerous factors. So in short, plant-based protein ingestion stimulates muscle protein synthesis rates. Whereas some plants and some plant-derived proteins show lesser muscle protein synthetic responses when we compare them to animal-derived proteins, there are ways to maximize these anabolic properties of plant-derived proteins. We can, for example, simply increase the amount of protein to be consumed. We can combine different protein sources to compensate for any protein or amino acid deficiencies. And we can also fortify specific proteins to compensate for any amino acid deficiencies. I'd like to finish with thanking some of the collaborators and sponsors of our research. And if you have any questions or want to get more updated information on publications, please feel free to visit our website. Thank you for attention.